Hello, listeners. Before we begin today's episode, we want to provide a trigger warning. The content of this episode will include discussions of child abuse and specific cases that tragically resulted in the death of a child. We understand that these topics are deeply distressing and can be triggering for many people. If you feel that this content may be too difficult for you to listen to, we encourage you to prioritise your mental health and consider skipping this episode. If you or someone you know is affected by any of the issues discussed, please seek support from a trusted person or professional. You can find links to support services in our show notes. Thank you for understanding and please take care while listening.
As a social worker, I don't have that power to remove that child out of that home or environment there and then, but yet somehow we're always the bad people and we're the people that actually take children away.
Essentially what our profession is to keep families together.
So in today's episode, we will be discussing why social workers have such a bad reputation. Yeah. And do we have a bad reputation?
Do we have a bad reputation? Yes, we do.
Yeah, we do. We do. But is it justified?
Is it justified? Do you know what? If we're being fair, I think at times, yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think if we're working in the way that we would, that we practice and that we would like other practitioners to practice, then we have to take a level of accountability in the history.
Yeah.
That social work practitioners hold.
Yeah.
And not falling into, the sins of their fathers or anything like that.
Yeah.
However, we can't not acknowledge that mistakes have been made. Yeah. Whether historically, currently, because there's more sort of recent cases that have come up, that have come to the attention of the media. Yeah. And yes, if we were to look at lessons that should be learned, mistakes have been made.
Yeah.
And we can't shy away from that. Do I think it's wholly justified? No. Because, there's wicked practitioners out there that are really trying to do a lot to change the face of social work and the way that we practice. And I think that there needs to be a balanced view.
Yeah.
In what that looks like. But yeah, I would say that's the purpose of this type of podcast, isn't it?
Yeah.
To take accountability for some of those things, but also to highlight the good practice that is out there.
Yeah.
Not blowing our own horns, but I do think that we are flying the flag for trying to achieve best practice.
Yeah. Trying to achieve best practice. I'd say a new age of social workers. Yeah. I feel like once upon a time, no one expected a social worker to come knocking on their door that looked like you or me.
Yeah, that's the truth.
Kind of perception of social workers have always, I'd say, probably kind of been a white middle-aged woman, white middle-aged man, not somebody who's kind of young and maybe dresses the same as maybe the person who you're knocking on the door for. So yeah, I think it's time to kind of address, I guess, some of the mistakes that have been made. We can't come into the profession and erase what's been done.
What's been done or what's been put out there as well.
Yeah, what's been done, what's been out there, the failings, but also to kind of shed light on, we can't continue to hold this bad reputation. I think one thing with social work is, once it hits the media and things get out there and things are happening and things are being said about social workers, it's always in a negative light. But we're not allowed to talk about our cases.
Yeah.
We're not allowed to go out there and kind of say, look, I've done this for this family and that family. So we're not able to champion and show people what it is that we've actually done to make a difference in someone's life.
Yeah.
But of course, when it comes to, the cases that hit the press, then it's like, all social workers are bad. And that's what sticks. And it's always easier to go with the narrative of like, that person's the enemy.
Yeah.
Whether it makes someone feel better, whether it justifies the way that they're feeling. I think, we don't get an opportunity to champion the good work and the good practice that we do 99% of the time.
Like, I'm not going to lie to you, Paris. I'm not going to lie because I was initially ashamed to announce my profession.
Really?
Yeah, it was when I'm asked what I do, there was this I don't know if I want to go into that conversation that I'm a social worker. It is something I've had to work on building in feeling confident to introduce that as my role in my profession and actually not have a tinge of embarrassment or shame around it. Yeah. Like, let's talk the things if we're going to talk the things.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting because why? Why and in what spaces?
Well, again, I would say this is in the spaces where I felt that there is a lack of understanding about what I do. Like, like I told you, when I came into the profession, I had no idea what social work was. My understanding of social work prior to that time was, it's a sort of therapeutic-y intervention. And the other side that I'd seen of social work was stuff on major shows that I was watching at the time, like EastEnders.
Yeah, Tracy Beaker. That was my first introduction to social work.
And my understanding of a social worker is that they go into people's houses, and if they decide they're walking out with that child through the front door that same day, that's what's going to happen.
So does that mean we can't blame people for having that? For thinking we have a bad reputation?
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. I feel like there is a level of justification for people having that view. I've held that view as a social worker.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where that sort of shame in introducing myself as one came from. And I think that was in, communities where people looked like me and spoke like me and, introduced these ideas of, you've joined a system that is oppressing us. You've joined a system that is essentially not built for us.
Yeah.
Is built to trip us up and
break families
and break
black families. Apart
yeah. And it was a worry because I didn't want to be labeled in that way. And we quite quickly learn in the profession when you get into it that actually things such as removing children from their family homes is sort of the last thing that you can actually do. Essentially what our profession is to keep families together. And we know how difficult it is to go through court processes and to actually get those orders. We've worked cases where there is a justifiable reason to have those concerns and actually being sometimes laughed out of court or, being told that threshold isn't met.
More evidence needed.
More evidence
you need
is
to go
needed.
Back and do more work with that family.
Have you tried this or have you tried that or have you explored this area of their sort of family network to avoid that happening? And I think it's in embracing that side of the role that I then began to feel confidence. I remember my introduction was then, I'm a social worker, but I don't do this. And I've never had a case where I've done that. So that felt like my justification. But then it got to a stage where this is my profession. This is what I do. Yes, that is an element that can happen. However, there would need to be justifiable reasons. And I quickly got into spaces and discussions where I was able to start backing up the profession.
Because the
knowledge was rising, the experience was rising. Whereas before, if I'd get into a conversation with someone and they're like, social workers ain't this and they ain't it. And I know someone who they got their children removed because of this and this, or they got intervention because of this and this. And then I had to start being able to, respectfully challenge that. I don't think your neighbor or your friend or your family member has given you
the full story.
Because the story you're telling me doesn't quite fit the remit of how the role works. Or
we're not just removing children because your cousin smokes weed. Essentially. And that's what people generally come and tell you, social workers are so bad because I just know that my cousin and, they said that she was smoking weed and they removed her children because of that.
Girl, no.
No, we close those cases generally.
Or you're supported. Or you're supported through sort of non-statutory services. And, there is another thing that I learned along the way as well is the consent. We don't have the right to just go in and make decisions for families. Those families, it's a collaborative thing. They have to consent to you working with them. And there has to be a justifiable reason for that consent to be overridden, essentially. And that doesn't sit within our laps as social workers. That gets escalated up to sort of senior leadership. And multi-agency teams coming together to make that decision.
Absolutely.
So, I think me personally as a professional, it's through that experience of being able to see how different cases play out that my trust in my role and the role that, my colleagues are playing really sort of foundationed itself in, and I wasn't as worried to introduce myself. So now, I'll introduce myself anywhere, any sort of time. Like, I'm a social worker. This is what I do. This is the type of work I do. And I don't hold that level of shame that I did at the beginning.
See, I was the complete opposite. I always felt really proud to say I was a social worker. But for me, it was more, what used to annoy me was that, again, there's that lack of knowledge of what a social worker is. So, we'd be in conversations, I'm a social worker. I might speak about a bit of a uni experience. And it's like, oh, you went to uni. And it's like, so in one breath, I have all these powers to just remove children. But then you also question the fact that I even went to uni. So it was kind of like people play the profession down in a sense that it's not so much a great profession, or that it's not really a academic profession. But then at the same time, I've got all these powers to just go in and remove children at the click of my finger. And that's what we're kind of seen as and known for. And I think the bad reputation comes from the lack of understanding as to what a social worker is, what they do, the different types of social workers. And I even find that working in the profession now in the NHS side of things, even the practitioners and my colleagues as nurses, occupational therapists, they don't even really understand what it is that we do within safeguarding and as a social worker. So actually, this is why we're here. Because if my colleagues and my profession and the professionals around me don't even understand what it is that I do, how do we expect families, children, young people to actually understand what it is that we do when we come from referral and assessment, which was the team that we started in, where we're the first point of call who go around there knocking on the door and say, hey, we've got a referral. And speaking on referrals, even referrals, people don't understand that we mind our business as social workers until we receive a referral. So we don't just go turning up at people's house to say, hey, look, I need to take your children away. We actually have to receive a referral that has a concern written on it that says, I'm worried about these children in this home. And then there's a threshold. And there's a threshold as to whether we're even going to intervene.
And let's talk about that front door as well.
The front door.
Because before it comes to the assessments and referrals, essentially when you send that concern off, whether you're a member of the public, so you're a relative, you're a neighbor, you're, just
teacher,
someone who,
profession,
a professional, when you send that referral off, it doesn't come straight to our team as assessments and referrals. It goes through what's called the single point of contact or front door of the MASH team.
Multi-agency.
Hub.
Yeah.
And essentially what that team does is they're screening. So these are advanced practitioners. You'll never really have a newly qualified social worker in those teams, or someone who's been practicing for sort of less
4 or 5 years,
than,
maybe?
you would have to have a good level of experience under your belt to secure a MASH role. And the purpose of that is that you're gonna be the one to screen that initial referral and make that decision as to actually has this met the threshold to further investigate, or actually can we signpost at this stage? So
signpost to a different service, some charity service or non-statutory service. Can we have a phone call and have a discussion about this and just kind of say, look, we know that there's an incident that's taken place. We're aware of it. It's been referred in. Is there any help and support? But actually at this point, we're not going to take any further action in terms of an assessment. And just kind of keep it at a low threshold level. Or it's going to be a
Section 47
or Section 17 coming in to say, we need to kind of investigate a little bit.
And when we're talking about these sort of numbers, Section 47, Section 17, let's just, for our listeners who may not know what that is, these are sections of the Children's Act. And the Children's Act is actually the piece of legislation that gives us the vim
underpins
our social work practice, and actually our roles are protected within that piece of legislation, and that's what gives us the backing to be able to walk into families' homes and do the interventions that we need to do. But I think as well, if we are taking it back to talking about the sort of understanding of what social workers do, one of the things that was sort of hovering over me when we were talking about that shame to introduce my role, we'd come out of the spate of some of the cases that had caught media attention at the time. And one of the major ones at the time for me was Baby P.
Yeah, Peter Connelly.
Baby Peter Connelly. Do you wanna sort of give us some background of Baby Peter Connelly for?
Yeah, I guess Baby P, as most people will know him, and I like to say Peter Connelly because I remember I had done I had a conversation or some training with a police officer, and he kind of said, his name's Peter Connelly, and everybody knew him as Baby P, but actually let's humanize this child. His name was Peter Connelly, and he was a person, and he sadly died due to the injuries of child abuse from his mum's partner, and like a lodger or a third party that was also living in the home. And there were many, many, many failings amongst social workers, but the whole professional network. And that's what came out of the serious case reviews that kind of looked into the death of Peter Connelly. And there were so many missed opportunities.
One of them being why no one asked why he had chocolate spread on his face every time he was seen.
So they had used chocolate to disguise bruises and marks on his face. I think he had previously been removed from the family home for a short period of time, and was returned home because, again, as we said, social work is about keeping families together with the right support. But he was returned home, and I think it was a period of like within 5 weeks of him returning home that he was murdered by his mum's partner. I think that made major media attention. And that put social workers right at the forefront of it. And I guess the question is, why was it the social worker who was kind of branded the failure of this child when there were many failings amongst professionals, i.e. health professionals? I can't remember if he was in any kind of nursery setting, but I know health professionals had involvement with him, had seen him, not raised any concerns about him. There was obviously the failings of social care and, removing a child, putting the child back in the home, not doing the right amount of visits, not doing the right checks. And I guess not being professionally curious, which is a big thing within social care. And that professional curiosity comes from, asking like, can you just wipe the chocolate off his face? Like, just to see how parents
respond. Or I've noticed every time I've come here, he's just had a bar of chocolate. Like, what's that about?
Yeah. And one big thing I remember of practicing is looking in fridges and looking at the home environment and taking note of what this child's home environment actually looks like. And I think there was a lot of missed opportunities in that regard. I think there was issues and concerns around how long the social worker had maybe been practicing. And I think, there were so many missed opportunities, but yet because social workers are seen as the ones who need to safeguard, and that is our duty, and our duty is to safeguard, it meant that actually the media felt that we had failed this child.
I think it's also that addition of the duty to investigate. And that's the difference between, say, the social work profession and other professions in the sort of multi-agency team outside of police, in that it's our duty to sort of ask those questions, to be professionally curious. So I do welcome the new pieces of sort of legislative guidance that shares that responsibility in terms of making safeguarding everyone's responsibility within that team. So yes, the duty to investigate that concern does still fall with the social workers. I think that we're moving to a stage where that responsibility to safeguard is shared. And I do think that was one of the major failings in some of those cases that did come to sort of media light. And I just don't think we can take away from the branding as well that comes in the media. So again, referring to young children who have sadly lost their lives with acronyms such as Baby P,
Yeah.
Or there is another horrendous one, also in the Thames.
Yeah.
That young person has a name. So it's just, I think it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one, and I don't think we can run away from the history.
No, but I think it's the accountability that's not there. I think there's an expectation for social workers to take that accountability, which we do. We know that we have a duty to protect. We know that we have a duty to safeguard, but also so do the police. And that's where we kind of come back to the legislation in the case of actually what many people don't know is that actually in order for us to take a child into our care, we have to go through a court process.
Yeah.
Whereas I could be standing next to a police officer and the police officer can do it there and then on the spot and remove a child.
Yeah, because they have police protection powers. So they actually are the only professional within that agency around children and vulnerable families who are able to make that decision on the spot, walk in, use their police protection powers. And yes, those police protection powers only last 72 hours, but at least it gives that respite for that child or that family.
Yeah.
And it gives a chance for us to then be able to investigate or at least initially start those.
And it means that you've removed a child from a very dangerous situation there and then. Whereas as a social worker, I don't have that power to remove that child out of that home or environment there and then. But yet somehow we're always the bad people and we're the people that actually take children away, but actually we don't necessarily have those powers. And it is very difficult to meet a threshold to get those powers where you have to go through the court process. And that's where you really have to evidence what it is that child is at risk of, that you need to really remove them from their home and potentially break up that family unit in order to keep that person safe. And then there's that balance of, are they safer at home in that family unit, or is the risk that high that, we do need to give you a court order to remove that child?
I do think there needs to be improved representation of social workers, especially in sort of family-friendly shows, sort of national shows, soaps, films, even just like, 4-part documentaries. I remember there was a program called Kiri, but that social worker, she wasn't depicted in the greatest of light. So it was almost justified, the behavior that she did receive when things went wrong. But I think that there is a lack of representation of people in the profession who are doing really, really well to advocate for their families, to advocate for their communities, and to advocate for the organizations in which they're working from, fighting for funding, fighting for access to panels, where people can get resources. And actually just being able to show people the long hours, being able to show people that you can't just switch off at 5 p.m. You carry some of these families with you when you are on holiday. I know I've gone on holiday, and after I've done the hey and everyone's gone to bed, I'm kind of like, oh, I wonder how so-and-so is. Or I wonder how family X is. And it's you get to know these families, especially when you're working in long-term teams. You get to really build a relationship with them, and they do become a part of your network, should I say, because you're case holding and you're managing families' lives. And I think that this is what is missed out in, shows such as, I'll say, EastEnders, where it's depicted that a social worker can just come in, have a cup of tea with the family and walk out the front door with that young person. And maybe that's showing the day that particular thing has been done. But what they failed to show is the lead up to that decision being made, or the lead up to that visit where that separation is going to happen. And which usually may take weeks or months or back and forths. Or there's been situations where we've had to argue with our managers and escalate up to senior management where they're not agreeing with us on the front line. And we're saying, look, we've been out with this family. We're the ones who are working with them. We don't believe that the response should be this. I don't think that advocacy is really, really shown. And that's what I think creates the stigma around our profession. And it almost leaves this room for questioning our decision making.
Yeah. Because I've had cases where actually, there's been really high concerns raised about a child, or a child has raised the concerns herself, I should say, around her family, how she's being brought up at home. I've gone there on a Section 47. So that is where we believe that this child is at risk of significant harm. We've gone around there or gone to the school, had a conversation. She's disclosed all this information, really high level concerns about what's going on, and she's refusing to go home after school.
Yeah.
And it's 4:00, it's 5:00, it's 6:00, it gets to 8:00 and you're still at the school. The school kind of want to close.
Yeah.
But you're having this conversation with her, and the police are also involved, and you're explaining what she told you and what she said to yourself and the police are saying, I don't think she should be going home. You call your manager's like, no, she needs to go home.
She needs to go home.
And you're like, no, but these are the concerns that she's raised, and the police have concerns. The police don't feel she needs to go home. And we don't have that ability to make that decision.
Yeah.
This is my case.
Yeah.
I'm the allocated social worker, but it's my manager who gets the last say.
Yeah.
And as much as I can advocate for what I think is best for that child at that point, because I've been the one here investigating, if what my manager says ultimately goes, as much I can challenge, I can write down on the system. I feel that.
But how far can you challenge is the thing.
How far can you?
And you don't want to be, in some teams, dependent on the personalities within that sort of management arrangement, you don't want to be the rebellious one.
You don't want to be the rebellious one, but you have to.
You have
to advocate for what you believe is right. And I think that's also a difficulty that a lot of practitioners do have. But with that particular case, we were there for hours.
Yeah.
I think I got home at like 11 o'clock that night. And my manager had said her senior had also said, no, she needs to go home. And there was a different resolution. She didn't go home. She went to another family member. But that's kind of what we're battling with. Now, God forbid something major did happen to that child.
You would have got dragged.
Her home. I then become the scapegoat.
You would have got scapegoated.
Like I said, it's my case. It's allocated to me. I would be seen as not doing enough to advocate for that child, or then it would be something that I missed out.
You didn't share the information with me.
I didn't share the information. And that is kind of, we have the bad reputation from the outside world, but then also within our practice, we then get scapegoated by our seniors when things go wrong. And I think, like you mentioned, Kiri, you saw that happen in that program, where when something went wrong with that case, the manager's kind of like, 99% of the time you practice really well, but there is that 1% that I'm a little bit like,
how'd your kids, how'd you have?
Yeah. And you have to go and you go, hold on a minute. You give me supervision. I discuss everything with you, but the moment things go wrong, they just scapegoat down to the lowest person, and the lowest person is the allocated social worker. So I think as much as the press might scapegoat us, we also get scapegoated within our
services,
by our senior managers, which make it then difficult to continue practicing and working with that family, because you're maybe having to make decisions that you don't necessarily agree with, or follow through with plans and so on that you don't necessarily agree with.
This is something that was recognized, though, to be fair to our sort of, to be fair to our profession, this is something that was recognized, especially with the death of Victoria Climbié. So another case that was known quite heavily in the media. Yeah. Victoria Climbié was an 8-year-old child who had come over. She's from Ivorian descent, and she had been abused by her grand aunt and her grand aunt's partner. And unfortunately, again, she was failed by the network who was in place to safeguard her. And it's from her death that the report was written, and working together to safeguard children documentation was then printed. And it's something that we still use today. And I think it was within that it was recognized that there does need to be this shared responsibility, not just amongst the professional network, but also within our social work teams and systems, in the way we work, in the way we advocate for one another, and the way we support each other's formulations.
Yeah.
Because like we said, we are sent out to families that have been raised, to our attention. And essentially what it is, it's your formulation.
Mm-hmm.
But you do have to take that back. And I think it's important to raise that the people who we are reporting these formulations to aren't always on the front line. And depending on how long they've been in those management positions, they may have been off front line for a number of years. And they're under a lot of pressure as well. So we're thinking we're under pressure with, I've got a caseload of 16 to 20 children, but they're overseeing the whole team.
Yeah.
So if you have a team of, 6 or 7 practitioners, you're overseeing over 100 cases of families that you've never met, and you have to make those quick-witted decisions. And
based on third-party information.
Well, exactly.
Based on what your social worker's coming back to tell you that they're aware of, or that they've seen, or that they've been told. So, yeah, I also get it for managers. But I if you're not out there on the front line, I don't want to hear your complaints as a manager, in all honesty. Because it's easier to sit there from a chair and just kind of dictate. And actually, how many managers are actually going out on visit, getting out of their chair and saying, actually, let's go and look at this one together. You've got 10 years of practice, 10, 15, maybe 20, maybe even more years of practice. Go out there with your social workers and go and investigate with them. And maybe they always say, if you send another eye out, people see things differently. So they may pick something up that social worker hasn't. So I do appreciate that. Yes, managers have a lot going on. Absolutely. But you're there to supervise and protect your team.
Yeah.
And that's what they essentially need to do. But I guess the question is, how do we shift that bad reputation? Because that bad reputation has always been there. And I don't see that it's necessarily getting any better. But what is it that you think we could do to kind of change that narrative?
Personally, what I try to do is I'm in a special place where I'm able to speak to practitioners that are about to break into the profession. So, in my lecturing role, I'm able to be with students, social work students. So I advocate for their practice in that way. Build yourself up in this way. Yeah. These are the mistakes that we've made. These are the questions that may be put to you by families. This is the best way in which you can practice. I do encourage sense of self, lived experience, and really just empowering students to know that they have the ability to make a change, and advocating for their own selves and the skills that they've built where they're coming from, and using that in their practice. So I think that that's where we need to lay our focus in the new generation of social workers that are coming out, in terms of being able to empower them to practice differently. And to be innovative in the way that they do that. And not to feel worried or to feel like they have to conform to a certain way of working with people. Not to fit like a mold. Because I don't fit a mold.
You don't follow the textbook.
No, I don't follow. I don't follow the textbook in the way I work with my families. I generally do tailor each intervention to each person. Like, for example, with some of my young people, one of my young persons, I used to go to the nail shop with her. That was our weekly visit, and she wouldn't turn up for any other professional network meetings, but she'll turn up to get her nails done. And that's where we really built a relationship. And I was able to get the information that I needed out of those visits. But that was something that wasn't financed by the local authority. I was doing that out of my own pocket. Do you get what I mean? So it can be frustrating, but I suppose there's ways around it. And it's really dependent on, are you going into the profession for the money? Because we know that, social work in some areas does pay well. Like, let's not shy away from it. But are you also there because that's what you want to do? Because when you want to do it, if there's something that a family needs, you will be creative in the way that you try to make that happen for them. And I think that that's that's where we need to go.
Yeah, it takes being resourceful.
Yeah.
It really does.
Acknowledging the change as well. Yeah. Internet, social media, like young people are the experts of this new age. And we need to acknowledge that they are the experts and stop going in with this sort of authoritarian way of, right, I'm here, to sort things out for you. And just acknowledging that some people are quite comfortable in the way that they're living their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important as well as, like you're saying, speaking with the youth, the young people, the students, the newly qualified, it's also about educating the families.
Yeah.
I think the way when I used to work with in children and families, I had bad experiences with families, of course, because they have their own kind of narrative, like we say, about social workers. But I found that when I really sat down and gave them the time to understand the process and what this whole, I'm not just here now, this is what's going to happen throughout the time that I'm with you. This is the time frame. This is the time scale. This is where we're at. And this is where I'm expecting to go. And the outcome of what I'm going to do with you, this intervention could be A, B, C, D. I felt like that's when they really understood that, oh, you're not here to take away my children.
Yeah.
Oh, you're not here to tell me I'm a bad parent. So I think, again, that's part of why we want to do this podcast for families and individuals to also be aware of and get that understanding as to actually this is what the process looks like. And actually, social workers have a bad reputation, but maybe they aren't that bad. It might just be a bit of my lack of understanding of what social workers do, what they can do, what they can
what they can't do as well,
what they can't do, what resources they can tap into, and what that support really looks like. And again, we always say early intervention, prevention is better than cure.
Yeah.
So working with families from an early point of view.
Yeah.
To kind of keep those concerns low, keep them out of the system, and work with them in those ways that they have.
Yeah, and I'm going to big you up in this one because I think a lot of the feedback from the families that you've worked with over the years has been, when it comes to point of closure, they don't even want to lose you.
Or
I didn't expect my time with the social worker to be like this. And I've had similar feedback as well. And I think it really is just humanizing us. We're not robots that have been sent out, by the government to
destroy
come
your family.
Yeah, to destroy you or to oppress you or to shake things up. It really is. We're here in a supportive role. And essentially, again, just taking it back to the Children's Act and the legislation that underpins our practice. The Children's Act is there to really safeguard children and to provide all children within the UK with a baseline foundation of basic needs.
Basic care and support.
Yeah. So like all children, regardless of your background, regardless of where you're coming from, regardless of your family structure, your economic background, your socio-economic background, like this is what we feel as a government you need.
Yeah.
So we've given social workers the ability to be able to enforce that piece of legislation. And I feel that when that is understood, then you will know that that's what we're there for.
Yeah.
And I think that when we keep advocating for that, that's it. That's what is going to help to sort of shatter the stigma.
Yeah. And I think it will be good for us to come back and do an episode on literally discussing those laws, those legislations. So Section 17 of the Children's Care Act, Section 47, early help, all of those different things that parents can go and read for themselves. But we can also sit down and break it down.
Just break it down.
Yeah. And actually let them understand how we want to support their families, but also for them to have that knowledge to actually push back if they want to push back, push back in the right way, and knowing that what they're pushing back on is because they feel that they're meeting that need, not because they don't like us.
Yeah.
So maybe that will come up in one of our episodes. Yeah, we'll see where we go. Thank you.
Done.
The information presented in this podcast is for general information purposes only. In line with the Data Protection Act 2018, there will be no mention of any child, family, or local authority. While our hosts are qualified social workers registered with Social Work England, the content of this podcast does not establish a social worker to client relationship. For any specific questions or concerns about your situation, we encourage you to consult with your local authority for guidance specific to your situation. Thank you.